Someone's asking about what stats for 3-liter TFSI engine failures on our tunes. This would be B8.
I don't know. Is that B8 or B8?
Yeah.
B8.
That's what TFSI usually.
It usually means that. We don't publish failure stats.
I mean, most of them end up on social media in some way or another. As far as I know.
But I mean, it's I would say essentially zero.
It's very low.
I can't think of any off the top of my head.
I know some have gone. We had some a while back for whatever reason when there was like a rash of motor issues. We had some. We actually had a motor shipped here because we were trying to figure out what was going on. That one was
high pressure pump.
That was the high pressure pump failed. Yeah. We've seen a handful of those.
The high pressure fuel pump was installed incorrectly and leaked fuel directly into the crankcase, which caused the engine to fail from
gases of
lubrication,
a bad lubricator. Yeah. So yeah, we've seen a couple of those. We've seen injector failures and intercooler brick failures.
Yeah, but we have never documented or validated a case where our tuning caused them to fail. So, technically speaking, failures from our tunes, the stat is 0.0. But it gets murky because engines blow up, even stock engines, lots of stock engines blow up. And so just because there's a correlation to having our tune on the motor, but when we dig in and we look for the root cause, it's never been our tuning.
Yep. And it's the same. I mean, it would be a, pandemic, epidemic, some sort of demic. I mean, if the tune was what was causing it, the tune is the most consistent, most repeatable component in
computer.
Any of these builds. Right. It is bit for bit. Every single thing is there and checksummed, and it is the same across all the cars.
Yeah.
So if there's a failure mode in there, it's going to show up regularly and repeatedly and in the same way.
Yeah. Nate's right. I want to expand on this point that unlike, let's say, assembly or component failure issues in an engine rotating assembly, like let's say Hans, on a Friday afternoon wanted to leave and didn't properly torque the head bolts properly, and then that engine fails, you can trace it back to Hans because Hans is not reliable, right? He's a human, and his motivations for what was, the Hefeweizen beers that he was going to consume that evening had a direct impact on the assembly and quality and result that particular motor produced. The computer processor inside the ECU does not drink beer, and it never takes a day off, and it doesn't have any friends, and it's not going anywhere. So to Nate's point,
it's very dull and does the same thing.
Does exactly the same fucking thing over and over again using light speed electricity, and it's infinitely perfectly reproducible every single time.
Yeah. Whereas you've got tens or hundreds of thousands of cars out there that have all had different histories, all had different maintenance intervals, all had different various things happen throughout their lives, happen in all of these massively intricate and very heavily, loaded and rotating assemblies. So yeah, there's a lot going on to make all this work. The ECU and the tune is, by far the most reliable.
So I've established it's incredibly reliable. So what does that mean? Well, it means that if it's functioning properly, it will never cause a problem. It also means that if it's not functioning properly, it will break everything every single time because it's so accurate.
Do it
so one of our competitors a few years ago released a new tune or an update for, I think it was Mark 7s.
I think I know what you're trying to talk about. Yeah.
And they blew like 10 motors in 3 hours.
It was a really short amount of time. It's like, hey guys, we got a new tune, and then pop.
The customers were like, sweet, they flashed it, got on the throttle the first time, and because the ECU is doing its thing so precisely every single time, boom, 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 blew up like 10, 15 motors almost instantly within hours. So that's just I'm not saying who it was, but I'm just trying to make this point. Thankfully, that's never happened to us. We've never made that type of terrible mistake, but they did. And, it just proves the point Nate brought up is that the ECU is does everything very precisely. There's no slop, there's no tolerance, there's no give. It's going to create the same exact result with the same inputs every single time. And so that, I mean, I think that's a good litmus test for any tuner. If we've flashed 10,000+ B8s and we've never had a failure, that means that it's not the tuning. There's no issue. Now, does that so what? So then let's say out of tens of thousands, 10 motors failed at some point. Well, it's not from the tuning, unless there was something specific about that car, that box code that created, which again, there's almost never a case where there's that few cars that are affected by that. So that means then you start looking at, well, what else could it be? What was the real root cause of failure? Was it, was it a fuel system component? Was it something in the engine, rotating assembly? Was it what kind of oil was used? And in the case that we brought up, the oil was replaced by,
it was diluted to the point where it didn't work, right?
And so that destroyed that particular motor. In other cases, the engine blew up. Oh, okay. Well, the heat exchanger started leaking coolant into the motor, and it hydro-locked. And in other cases, the catalytic converter melted and caused EGTs to skyrocket, and that whole cylinder melted. So there have been engine failures on our tuning, but they're not because of the tuning. And
in the B8 in particular, we were talking about consistency. I don't know if it's a well-known fact, but it's the software on the B8 and B8.5. Audi had to do a software update towards the end of life of the B8, and that luckily it was an emissions related something or other. So that forced anyone with a B8 that they had to go to the dealer, get updated before they could re-register their cars. That migrated every single box code on the B8.5 to the exact same software. The box codes are different. There's differences between them, but the underpinning calibration is like 99.9% identical between all the B8.5s. And then the B8 has its own like one version of software that everything ended up kind of migrating to as well. So across all of our platforms, the B8 and B8.5 are the most homogeneous, you could say, calibration package between them. So you're getting the identical software across all of the different platforms or all the different cars.
The B8s in particular were affected by a piston ring problem, which Audi has had for years. The B8.
Oh, this is age. The oil control ring stuff.
The B8 2 liters suffered from that. New from the factory. We had a number of B8 like A4s and A5s with blown motors. Early on that ended up getting warranted and stuff like that. So Audi has struggled with piston ring, and that's a popular failure. But everything else I mentioned, that I just mentioned about intercoolers and cats and stuff like that, all affect the B8. But again, our tuning's not the issue.